Hi, my name is Elena, and I'm 32 years old. I serve as an intelligence captain in the United States Army, a job that demands discipline, silence, and a certain kind of strength that most people never see. People imagine medals, uniforms, classified missions, and satellite rooms full of glowing screens, but the truth is far quieter. Most of my work happens in shadows, behind closed doors, between lines of code, and inside rooms where the wrong word can cost lives. I've learned to carry secrets the way other people carry memories, carefully, quietly, and without expecting anyone to understand. But if someone had asked me years ago what the hardest part of my life was, I never would have said the deployments or the hostile territories. I never would have mentioned the nights without sleep, or the operations that still cling to me like dust trapped in the corners of my mind. No, the hardest part has always been much simpler, painfully personal. My father, Richard. My mother passed away when I was in my early 20s, and something in my father hardened after that. He had always been emotionally distant, but her death turned distance into something colder. Where she used to be warmth, reason, and balance, he became the opposite, sharp, dismissive, and consumed by the world of money and power. And somewhere in that transformation, I became a symbol of everything he disapproved of. To Richard, I was a wasted opportunity. A brilliant daughter who chose a low-level military job, as he liked to call it, instead of joining his business world of boardrooms, mergers, and billions. He had never once visited me on base. He had never once asked about my missions. And he had never once said he was proud. Not even close. Still, I tried. Every daughter does, in some way. I attended his birthdays, showed up to his business events, answered his calls even when the tone made me regret picking up. I thought some part of him still cared, some small piece that remembered I was his child. Maybe I was wrong. Growing up, I used to think he ignored my accomplishments because he didn't understand the military world. Later, I realized it was something far simpler. He didn't want to understand. My success didn't benefit him. It didn't make shareholders clap or investors lean in. It didn't place his last name in headlines or magazines. So in his eyes, it meant nothing. There were moments, small ones, when I wondered if joining the army had been a mistake. Not because I doubted my purpose, but because the price had turned out to be higher than I expected. I didn't lose friends. I didn't lose myself. But I lost my father long before I ever realized he was already gone. My mother used to say, "Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, and sometimes it simply refuses to break." I didn't understand that back then. Now I do. Every mission, every briefing, every coded message I've relayed, every single one has taught me how to be strong without noise, how to survive without applause, how to choose what's right, even when no one is watching. But nothing could prepare me for what was coming. Not my training, not my discipline, not the medals tucked away in my drawer. Because the worst betrayal in my life did not come from terrorists, foreign operatives, or silent enemies hiding behind foreign borders. It came from the person who should have protected me, trusted me, seen me. Standing here now, thinking about where everything began, I still feel the sting of that night, the night when a high-profile business dinner turned into the moment that changed the course of my entire life. The night my father humiliated me in front of some of the wealthiest and most influential people in the country. The night I realized I wasn't just unappreciated, I was unwanted. And yet, that same night, I did something that saved a life. A life far more important than anyone knew at the time. What I didn't realize was that this single, silent act would pull every hidden truth to the surface. Truths so dark they would tear apart everything I thought I knew about my father and about the world he was part of. This is how it all began. The night of the business dinner felt like stepping into a different universe, one I never fully belonged to, no matter how many times I brushed shoulders with it. The event was held at a luxury hotel in downtown Chicago, the kind that smelled like old money and polished marble. Chandeliers hung so high and so bright they looked like frozen fireworks suspended in gold. Men in tailored suits and women in glittering dresses floated around the hall, smiling politely, their conversations blending into a low hum of power and self-importance. I walked in wearing a simple black evening dress. Nothing dramatic, nothing flashy. I never cared about matching the shine of a room. But even before I reached the table, I felt eyes drifting toward me.
Part of it was curiosity.
Part of it was recognition. Richard's daughter, the army one. My father stood near the head of the long mahogany table, a glass of whiskey in his hand, surrounded by CEOs, investors, and two senators I recognized from television. His posture was relaxed, confident in that way only he could manage. When he saw me approaching, the smile on his face tightened into something polite but distant, an expression I'd learned to expect. "Elena," he said, his tone clipped, "you finally made it. Finally." I arrived exactly on time. But to him, it always felt like I was late to his world. A world I had never chosen. Before I could respond, one of the men, someone who had probably donated millions to a political campaign, asked casually, "So, Richard, is this your daughter?" "The one in the army." Richard chuckled. Not warmly.
Not proudly.
But with that practiced, dismissive laugh he used whenever my career was brought up. "Yes," he said, swirling the glass in his hand. "She's an intelligence officer. You know, one of those positions where everything is classified, so you can't really tell what they actually do." Laughter spread around the table. Polite. Unbothered. Sharp enough to cut. I stood there, feeling the sting settle into my chest the way cold wind settles into bones. Another man leaned in, smirking. "Must be exciting. Do you jump out of planes or tap computers all day?" Before I could answer, my father waved a hand. "Nothing like that," he said. "Honestly, it's a lot of government jargon and small tasks. Not exactly impactful." Impactful. I had saved lives without making a sound. But in this room, none of it mattered. I took a quiet breath and sat down at the opposite end of the table, trying not to let the humiliation show on my face. I'd learned long ago that fragility around my father only fueled him. His words stayed with me, though, echoing louder than the conversations around us. Dinner was served: roasted salmon, herb potatoes, a salad with dressing too fancy to pronounce. I hardly tasted any of it. My mind was trapped in the spiral of my father's tone, the condescension in his voice. He spoke loudly, as if making sure I could hear every word, bragging about his investments, his negotiations, his upcoming multi-million-dollar expansion plans. Someone asked him, "Will Elena ever join the company?" Richard laughed again, louder this time. "Oh no. She prefers running around with soldiers instead of doing real business." The laughter that followed was no longer polite. It was cruel.
Direct.
And my father didn't even glance at me while they mocked the uniform I wore with honor. I felt my chest tighten, not with shame, but with anger I wasn't allowed to show. Soldiers don't react emotionally. Intelligence officers don't make scenes. My training had taught me how to stay calm under pressure, but nothing in my career had prepared me for the kind of pressure only family can create. I kept my eyes down until the noise of laughter finally softened. But then, just as I lifted my gaze, I saw a face in the crowd that froze my breath. A man standing near the far corner of the hall, expressionless, still, observing. And in that instant I recognized him. Victor. Interpol's internationally wanted assassin. Standing in the same room where my father had just humiliated me. And he wasn't here for dinner. He was here for something far more deadly. The moment my eyes locked onto him, the noise of the room faded. Not completely, but enough that everything felt muted, like someone had lowered the volume on the world. Victor wasn't dressed like an assassin. That was the first sign. He was exactly who I thought he was. Real killers don't wear the role, they blend. They disappear into silk ties, polished shoes, and quiet shadows behind champagne glasses. He wore a charcoal suit, nothing remarkable, nothing flashy. His hair was slightly slicked back, and he held a drink without ever actually sipping it. But his posture, that gave him away. Rigid shoulders, even breathing, steady eyes. It was the stance of someone who had trained their entire body to respond before their mind even processed danger. I'd seen that look before. Not in boardrooms, but in war zones. Most people don't notice danger in a room full of comfort. But I had learned to see the one face that didn't belong, the one movement that didn't match the rhythm of safety. And Victor's presence cut through that room like a blade hidden under silk. I lowered my gaze, not wanting to signal recognition. If he noticed me noticing him, he could change his plan or, worse, accelerate it. My pulse steadied, not out of calmness, but out of trained discipline. I forced myself to breathe the way I've been taught. Deep, slow, intentional. From the corner of my eye, I scanned the hall. General Marcus had just arrived. People clapped politely as he made his way toward the head table. He was the guest of honor tonight. A respected five-star general, a man with decades of service, known for making enemies in all the right places. And Victor was looking directly at him.
Not openly.
Not obviously, but with that low, assessing gaze that professional killers wear, a calculating stare that measures distance, timing, obstacles, exits. I felt the ground shift beneath me. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't some misidentification. Victor's presence wasn't accidental. He was here for Marcus. My father's voice droned in the background, still bragging about some deal overseas. He had no idea that death stood less than 50 feet from him. I reached for my clutch bag slowly, pretending to adjust something inside. My fingers brushed against the smooth metal surface of my secure comm device, a military-issued microtransmitter, small enough to pass as a compact mirror. I flicked it open under the table. I typed fast, shorthand, encrypted protocol codes drilled into me over the years. Alpha Blue to Eagle Command. Hostile ID confirmed.
V present.
Target likely Marcus. Immediate covert extraction recommended. The message looked harmless, just a string of numbers and letters. But to the military communications team, it was a silent alarm, a fire bell inside a whisper. I pressed send. 1 second.
2.
3. Nothing changed in the room, which was good. That meant the system was working. Across the hall, Marcus's aide received an alert on his smartwatch. He glanced down and his jaw tightened, just enough for me to notice. He whispered something into Marcus's ear. Marcus didn't turn his head toward me, didn't scan the room, didn't break stride. He simply nodded and excused himself from a conversation. A moment later, 2 plainclothes security officers subtly blocked the hallway Victor would have needed for a clean shot. Within 60 seconds, Marcus was gone, quietly escorted through a service corridor. Victor's eyes narrowed. Not dramatically.
Just barely.
He knew the plan had shifted. He scanned the room again, slower this time. A flicker of irritation crossed his expression, not anger, but the frustration of a man whose calculation had just been disrupted by an invisible variable. Then he turned and walked toward the exit. Not rushed. Not suspicious. Just a man leaving a party early. No one noticed him. No one ever notices danger when it behaves politely. I kept my composure, but inside, adrenaline thundered through my bloodstream. I had just prevented an assassination, quietly, discreetly, without a single person at that table realizing what almost happened. My father continued talking, oblivious. He never even noticed me send the message. What I didn't know was that this silent intervention would become the key that unraveled everything. Every secret my father had buried, every crime he thought would never surface. Victor wasn't the only threat walking out of that building. There was another one, sitting at the head of the table. The morning after the dinner felt strangely calm at first, almost too calm. I woke up early, as I always did, my internal clock locked into military rhythm. The sunlight filtered through the blinds in thin golden lines, warming the quiet of my apartment. For a brief moment, everything felt normal. The night before, the humiliation, the tension, Victor's presence, felt like a distant dream. A dangerous dream, yes, but still a dream. I brewed coffee, trying to settle my mind, but unease lingered beneath the surface like a quiet vibration. A part of me was still processing what had happened. Another part of me wondered why Victor had been there at all. Assassins don't pick random events. They don't chase low-value targets. Someone had brought him here. Someone had hired him. Someone close. But I didn't have time to complete that thought. Because just as I lifted the mug to my lips, a thunder of engines roared outside my father's estate, a place close enough that the sound carried through the still morning air. At first, I didn't react. The neighborhood occasionally saw high-end security or corporate convoys. But this was different. This was too many engines. Too fast. I stepped to the window. My breath caught in my throat. Black SUVs, 6, then 7, then 8, swarmed around my father's mansion like a tactical shell. Their doors swung open in perfect synchronization. Armed officers in dark jackets fanned out across the lawn, each marked with a bold emblem I recognized instantly. Interpol. And right beside them, U.S. Marshal Service. A full-scale international federal joint operation. My phone vibrated violently in my hand. I glanced down. A text from an unknown secure line. Captain Elena, remain available. Your presence will be required. My stomach tightened. I set the coffee down, grabbed my jacket, and drove toward the estate. When I arrived, yellow tape already marked the perimeter. News vans hadn't reached the street yet, but it was only a matter of time. I flashed my military ID. The officers recognized my clearance and let me through. The front door to my father's mansion was wide open. Not broken. Opened by warrant. Inside, Richard stood in the foyer, surrounded by officials. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, not physically, but in presence. The confidence that had filled him just hours ago at the dinner was gone, replaced by a pale, trembling anger he struggled to hide. Julia, the Interpol lead investigator, was the first to acknowledge me. Her posture was firm, professional, and undeniably authoritative. Captain Elena, she said, stepping toward me. We need to speak with you. My father snapped. She has nothing to do with this. Elena, go home. This doesn't concern you. Julia didn't even look at him. On the contrary, Mr. Richard, she said sharply, your daughter is the reason we're here this quickly. I felt the air shift. My father froze. His eyes narrowed at me, not with concern, but with suspicion. What did you do? Julia stepped in before I could answer. We traced encrypted financial transfers tied to an international contract. These transfers connect directly to Victor, the assassin present at last night's event. My chest tightened. It was worse than I feared. She continued, the payments originated from accounts linked to your father's corporate shell companies. Offshore holdings. Laundered networks. Everything fits. My father's face drained of color. Julia's voice lowered. Victor didn't come here for business. He came because he was hired. And your father, Captain, seems to have been part of the chain. I stared at Richard. This man who belittled my career, mocked my discipline, dismissed my sacrifices. He wasn't just morally corrupt. He was criminally entangled with the very kind of people I spent my life fighting. And for the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes. Not fear of the law. Fear of being exposed. The hours that followed felt like walking through a fog, thick, heavy, and impossible to escape. The mansion buzzed with investigators, agents, and officers moving with a precision that reminded me of military operations. Except this time, I wasn't part of the team. I was the daughter of the man under investigation. That alone made everything feel twisted, like the world had flipped itself upside down and left me standing on the wrong side of gravity. I stood near the staircase, watching as agents carried out boxes of documents, hard drives, financial ledgers, and electronic devices. Every item was tagged, sealed, and recorded. My father sat on a velvet armchair, his hands shaking just enough for me to notice. He kept his gaze low, refusing to look at me. Or maybe he couldn't. Maybe the truth was too heavy. I didn't know what to feel. Anger? Sadness? Betrayal? Shame? All of them hit me at once, colliding like waves during a storm. Julia approached me again, her tone softer this time, still firm, still professional, but carrying a trace of empathy I hadn't expected. Captain Elena, she said, I want you to understand something. This wasn't a one-time mistake. Your father has been under monitoring for months. Months. While I stood beside him at family dinners. While he mocked my uniform. while he rolled his eyes at my missions. He was the one living the double life, not me. What exactly did he do? I asked, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted the answer. Julia didn't sugarcoat anything. Multiple offshore accounts tied to known criminal entities. Money funneled through shell corporations. High-value transfers marked with encrypted signatures connected to Victor. And preliminary forensics show your father had direct communication with intermediaries of an international financial syndicate. My head spun. I had spent years dismantling networks like this, chasing shadows across continents, analyzing coded messages, tracking digital trails left by people far more dangerous than they appeared. And now I found out one of those shadows led straight to my father. It doesn't make sense, I whispered. He didn't need money. He didn't need power. He already had everything. Julia sighed quietly. Sometimes greed isn't about need. It's about addiction. Sometimes people like your father think they're untouchable. I didn't respond, because I knew she was right. Richard had always believed rules were for other people. He liked winning too much, liked controlling too much, liked being the man everyone listened to. Maybe crime offered him something even his wealth couldn't, a different kind of thrill, a different kind of influence. One of the investigators called out, "Ma'am, you should see this." Julia excused herself, leaving me alone in the hallway. I sank onto the edge of the staircase, pressing my fingers against my temples. For years, my father had told me I chose the wrong path, that I was wasting my potential, that I should have joined his world of business and money. All this time, he'd been hiding behind an empire built on lies. And here I was, someone he dismissed, someone he belittled, realizing I had helped expose him without even meaning to.
My phone buzzed again.
A message from my commanding officer. "Elena, remain cooperative but emotionally detached. You are still part of the national security chain." Emotionally detached. How could I be? I exhaled slowly. This wasn't just a case. This wasn't just a criminal investigation. This was my father, my blood, my history. But I knew what my duty was. And I knew what my mother would have wanted. I couldn't protect him. I couldn't look away. And I couldn't pretend this wasn't happening. For the first time in my life, my heart and my uniform demanded the same thing. The truth. And the truth was about to take me into a courtroom where everything, family, loyalty, justice, would collide. The federal courthouse felt colder than I expected. Not physically. Its temperature was perfectly regulated, its marble floors polished, its hallways wide and well-lit. But there was a kind of emotional chill that seeped into my bones the moment I stepped inside. Maybe it came from knowing that this time I wasn't walking in as a soldier or an intelligence officer or someone presenting classified briefings behind closed doors. This time, I was walking in as the daughter of the accused. My father, Richard, had always commanded attention. In boardrooms, in interviews, in charity galas, he stood like a man who owned every space he entered. But today, sitting at the defense table in a crisp gray suit, he looked smaller. Not physically. His shoulders were still broad, his chin still lifted, but something in his presence had cracked. The arrogance wasn't gone, but it flickered like a light struggling to stay lit. People whispered as I entered. Reporters lined the back of the courtroom, pens ready, cameras lowered only because they weren't allowed to film inside. I could feel their curiosity. Richard's story was headline gold. Prominent business figure linked to assassin and criminal syndicate. And now his daughter, the military intelligence officer, was stepping into the spotlight. Judge Walter entered, his presence immediately commanding respect. His eyes were sharp, steady, and unreadable. He wasn't here for drama. He wasn't here for headlines. He was here for justice, and nothing else. The clerk called the room to order. The prosecution table stood firm. Colin, the federal prosecutor, arranged his files with disciplined precision. I'd been told he was one of the best, fearless in court, relentless with evidence, and known for dismantling defenses without ever raising his voice. When the trial officially began, Colin rose. "Your Honor," he began, "this case concerns not just financial crimes, but an attempted assassination tied to international networks. and the defendant, Richard, knowingly engaged in dealings that facilitated these crimes. My father's attorney tried to interject, but Judge Walter lifted a hand. "You will have your turn, Mr. Lawson. Let the prosecution continue." Colin continued, with calm intensity. He outlined the trail of encrypted transfers, the offshore accounts, the intercepted communications, and the timeline of events leading directly to Victor's arrival at the dinner. Every point was laid out clearly, like pieces of a puzzle snapping into place. When the prosecution finished their opening statement, it was my father's turn to respond. His lawyer rose confidently. "Your Honor, the prosecution is drawing conclusions from circumstantial data. My client is a respected businessman with global partnerships. Any international transaction can be misinterpreted. There is no direct evidence tying him to an assassin." Then Richard himself stood up, against his attorney's subtle nudge to sit. His voice was smooth, steady, almost rehearsed. "Your Honor, I have always been a man of integrity. My daughter, she's a fine soldier but has been brainwashed by her years in military intelligence. She sees threats where none exist." My jaw tightened. The courtroom murmured. He had just dismissed me, not as an officer, not as a witness, but as his misguided child. Judge Walter's face remained unreadable. "Mr. Richard, sit down. Personal remarks are not evidence." When the witnesses were called, General Marcus was the first to take the stand. He looked straight at the judge and spoke with the presence only a five-star general could have. "Your Honor, the night of the dinner, a credible threat was present. Captain Elena identified the hostile element and sent a silent alert that prevented my assassination." Gasps rippled through the room. My father's defense attorney tried to challenge the general's credibility, something no smart lawyer should ever do, but Marcus held firm. "I trust Captain Elena with my life. Her assessment has never been wrong." Then, finally, they called my name. I stood, breathing slowly, reminding myself of who I was, not the daughter sitting in that courtroom, but the officer sworn to tell the truth. When I took the stand, the oath felt heavier than any I had ever spoken. Colin stepped forward. "Captain Elena," he said gently, "tell the court what you witnessed the night of the dinner." And for the first time, I spoke the truth out loud, every detail, every code, every instinct that had guided me. As I spoke, my father stared at me with a look I can't fully describe. Anger.
Fear.
And maybe, somewhere deep beneath it all, recognition. Recognition that the daughter he always belittled was the one whose testimony could destroy him. But I kept going. Because this wasn't about him anymore. This was about justice. When I stepped down from the witness stand, my hands were steady, but my heart felt heavier than it ever had in any battlefield or intelligence briefing. Testifying against a father is not something any training prepares you for. But the moment I returned to my seat, I knew something had shifted, not just in the courtroom, but inside Richard himself. He no longer looked furious. He no longer looked confident. He looked exposed. The kind of exposed that happens when the truth corners a man who has spent decades hiding behind power and polished lies. The prosecution continued presenting evidence. Encrypted transfers, offshore accounts, shell corporations leading directly to financial syndicates known for hiring contract killers. For every document the defense tried to discredit, Colin produced two more that traced back to Richard's signature or his device. Even I felt the air tighten around us with each new revelation. When Julia from Interpol took the stand, the room went silent. Her testimony was calm and clinical. She walked the court through the months of surveillance, the intercepted messages, and the financial footprints that led directly from Victor's employers to my father. She wasn't emotional. She didn't need to be. The truth itself carried weight. When she finished, the defense looked cornered. And for the first time, Richard didn't stand tall. He sat slumped, shoulders sagging, his fingers gripping the edge of the table like he was holding onto the last piece of a world collapsing beneath him. Judge Walter called for a short recess. I stepped into the hallway, needing air. I leaned against the cool marble wall, listening to my heartbeat pound in my ears. I hated this feeling. I hated that justice and pain were walking hand in hand. I hated that the man who mocked my career now depended on my silence. Silence I could no longer give him. When court resumed, everyone sensed something was different. Richard stood before the judge. His lawyer whispered urgently, but my father shook his head, silencing him. He looked older, smaller, human in a way I had never seen. "Your Honor," he said slowly, I would like to make a statement." The courtroom held its breath. He exhaled sharply, as if years of arrogance were finally shattering. "I do what they're accusing me of," he said. "Not all of it directly, but enough of it to deserve this." A ripple of shock spread across the room. He continued, "I thought I could handle the people I was dealing with. I thought I was in control. But I wasn't. And I let greed blind me. I let ambition turn into something darker." His voice cracked, just slightly. "And my daughter." He paused, swallowing hard. "She's the only one who ever did the right thing."
He didn't look at me.
Maybe he couldn't. Judge Walter nodded once, his expression firm but not unkind. "Mr. Richard, your confession will be entered into record." The sentencing was swift. The crimes were severe, well-documented, and undeniable. Years of federal imprisonment. No loopholes. No corporate shields. No luxury, no influence, no boardroom power left to protect him. As the officers approached to escort him out, he glanced toward me. Briefly. A flicker of something, regret, maybe, passed through his eyes. But it wasn't enough to erase what he had done. And it wasn't enough to heal what had been broken. When he disappeared through the side door in handcuffs, the courtroom felt unbearably still. For a long moment, I sat there, breathing slowly, letting reality settle like dust in sunlight. I wasn't relieved. I wasn't triumphant. I was simply at peace with the truth. Because justice had spoken. And I had stood on the right side of it, even when it hurt. 1 year later, life felt different. Not lighter, not happier, just clearer. The kind of clarity that comes after a storm finally passes and you're left standing in the quiet, staring at the pieces that remain. People assume time heals everything, but I've learned that time doesn't heal, it reveals. It shows you what mattered, what didn't, and what you must learn to live with. I was assigned to a new intelligence unit in Washington, a team specializing in counterfinancial espionage. Exactly the kind of work that, ironically, mirrored the crimes my father had hidden for years. My role required meticulous analysis, long hours, and an unwavering commitment to truth. And, strangely enough, it felt right. It felt like the path I had always been meant to walk, even if it had cost me more than I expected. My apartment was quieter these days. No more calls from my father pretending to care. No more strained family dinners where I tried to earn approval that was never coming. Peace, I realized, wasn't always found in fixing relationships. Sometimes it was found in letting go of the ones that refused to grow with you. One afternoon, as I was sorting through files on a new case, a letter arrived, handwritten, the kind of thing people rarely send anymore. The return address was unmistakable. Federal Correctional Institution, Unit C. I hesitated before opening it. My hands didn't shake, but there was a heaviness in my chest that made it difficult to breathe for a moment. When I finally unfolded the paper, his handwriting stared back at me, stiff, uneven, but unmistakably his. "Elena," it began. "I know I have no right to ask for anything. I don't expect forgiveness. But I want you to know, I see you now. I see the strength I tried to deny. You didn't destroy me. You saved me from the lie I had become. I wish I had been strong like you." I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it inside a drawer. Not out of anger, not out of love, but because some things are meant to be acknowledged, not carried. As I stood by the window that evening, watching the city lights flicker like distant stars, I felt something settle inside me, a quiet certainty I hadn't had before. The world believes strength is loud. But I know better now. Real strength is silent. Real courage is choosing truth even when no one applauds. And real justice comes from standing firm when everything inside you wants to fall apart. This was never a story about taking someone down.
It was a story about standing up.
And sometimes, the decisions made in silence. echo louder than anything ever spoken. If you connected with this story, I invite you to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful narratives like this one. Your support helps these stories reach more people, and I truly appreciate every viewer who stays until the end. Thank you for watching.